Legacy of the Wizard for the NES is known for its vast dungeons, but the beginning of the game indicates that there is a full above-ground world that includes a cabin, treehouse that contains a shop, and off in the distance, a mountaintop castle. The Gamescape artist has created a painting that includes all of these features into a fully realized landscape. Today we are going to attempt a pixel art take on the Gamescape artist's painting of Legacy of the Wizard. To start with, we're just going to use our line work to kind of rough in the major elements of the landscape. We've got our background mountains and our castle. These are those pine trees. Putting in the path. And these larger foreground trees here are going to be the focal point of the drawing. Especially this treehouse that contains the shop. And the cabin. For the sky, we're going to use the gradient tool with a dithering setting. We'll make that gradient of the light orange to the dark blue sky. And then we'll kind of place our clouds using the circular brush here, just trying to approximate a cloud shape. Add a few of these clouds in here. Not too many. And then we're adding the highlights onto the clouds. This is where the sun is hitting those guys. And some darker colors to indicate some places that are shaded. And we kind of mix all these colors together until we have something that looks like a cloud. That looks pretty good. And we'll continue on with the other clouds. Mixing those colors together. Highlights and some of the darker tones. Just trying to give the impression that these clouds have some volume to them. It's hard to mess them up since clouds can be however you want to make them. And the last little cloud here highlights the midtones and the shadows. And here are our clouds. Now for these mountains way off in the distance. I'm gonna start by doing our skyline there and then filling in the shape. We'll add our ridges in here, kind of defining which sides are gonna have the sun hitting them. And we'll add some highlights here to indicate which faces are directly to the sun, and then we add some noise to them, make them look natural. For the other set of mountains, we need to make some spikier strokes here. These are some pokey mountains. So I just begin by roughing in the skyline of the mountains here. And then I'm going to go through and kind of fix up these peaks here. Just trying to make sure they're pokey. Now we start adding the highlights onto the mountains here. These are the bits of the peaks that the sun is hitting. And then we start adding the mountain faces that the sun is hitting here. This color is really giving off a sunset kind of vibe, which wasn't my intention when I started the painting, but as we get down toward the bottom, we do some shallower strokes to kind of indicate that we're coming down into the foothills. And we're adding some other shades to give some texture to the mountains here. These bits aren't quite as in direct sunlight as the brighter counterparts. And just fixing up some little bits on these mountains here. Adding some real bright highlights at the tops, where the sun is extra direct. Here are the mountains in the sunset. It's time to build our castle. Start by roughing out the shape here, building our spires and our walls. Just trying to get the silhouette in here. The building on top of the castle is interesting. I liked that. And now we're just trying to figure out how the color is going to work for the castle here. Trying to use colors already in the palette. I'm having a hard time making things lit and shaded with the current colors. Now I start adding some details in, adding some texture to the walls, and some windows on the structure on top. Adding some light source. And here I try to change the colors a bit, start messing with the hues and the saturation, And I settle on this kind of gold colored castle. I think it turned out really well. For the trees, we just kind of begin by putting in some triangle shapes here. Just approximating the size and position of the trees. And they're kind of trailing off into the distance here, so they get smaller as they go back. And we start adding some varied shades of green, trying to indicate the branches here as much as we can. These are the light sides of the trees that are getting sun. And the dark side is in the shade. I decide that these trees are a little too bright, so I do a bit of a value adjustment on them to darken them up. Then I start adding some trees back behind this first row of trees that are more shaded. And indicate that there's more than just a single line of trees, but more a whole forest back there. Next, we're going to tackle the grass that's kind of spilling out in front of the trees at the bottom of the mountains here. It kind of goes from darker colored grass in the front to some lighter colored grass in the back. End up using the gradient tool with the dithering effect to accomplish that. And kind of manually make it noisy. Then we move on to our foreground trees here. Just trying to figure out the shapes of them. Using some colors from the palette to indicate the lighted side of the trees. I don't end up being a big fan of this orangish color on the trees. Pull a new color from the palette. Just trying options here. There we go, kind of a light brown with a greenish tint. That looks pretty good for the trees. Now the tree stack that our shop sits upon is actually 4 trees grown really closely together here. Just adding some branches that kind of weave back and forth between the trees. And some branches that kind of stick out. The mountains were kind of blending into our trees here, so I desaturated the mountains in the back to give some contrast between the trees and the mountains. And now we tackle our tree foliage, our leaves. begin by roughing out the general shape of the canopy here. Some of these leaves go back behind the shop trees. And then of course the shop has a big old canopy. Maybe not that big. Alright, now we are rendering out our trees here, adding the light colors to the sunward side. Mixing in some mid-tones here. And our shadows. This will give us the effect that our trees are not just flat objects. And I kind of mix these batches of color together here. I'm always looking at the thumbnail in the lower right to see how it looks in a zoomed out version. Alright, and then for some of the smaller bunches of leaves, we're just copying and pasting, resizing some of our other trees here, and then fixing them up after. Save us a lot of time. Need to add some highlights to the trees here. I start with a real bright color that was too bright, so we tone it back a little. This color goes on kind of the edges of the clumps of leaves because a lot of our light is from behind. Alright, now we're adding in some foliage down in below the trees here. Okay, our scene is starting to come together. Next we have the path. This is where our heroes walk when you're playing the game on NES. Just trying to have the path kind of get smaller as it goes off into the distance there. And start adding some dirt texture to it. And some lighter bits to indicate some rocks that are sticking up off of the path a little bit. And now it's time for our happy little cabin. I struggle a lot with getting the perspective right on the cabin here. It's a bit too squashed. But I want to see how it looks with texture. And I kind of open up the front of it by dragging it over, making the front appear wider. And we see less of the side profile of the cabin here. Adding the roof on. The roof creates all sorts of shadows under the eaves. on some windows there. And a door and some more windows. This is where our heroes live. There's a cellar to the side of the house here. Add a little roof to that. And that piece is shaded by the cabin, so it's a bit darker there. Now on to the shop up in the trees. The shop has kind of a curved roof. Add in the shadows under the overhang of the roof there. And a circular door. Trying to keep a tree-like texture on the shop. We add a way to get up to the shop with this ladder here. And we're putting our shop sign. Ran out of space there. Try that again. Tiny pixel letters. And here are our structures down near the path. Now we've got to take care of the grass in the foreground here. I start by applying some dithering and just some chunks of color, break those up. Add in some wildflowers here. Also want to add some rocks into our grassy patch here, so I start outlining those. Just making the sunward side highlighted and the side near the grass shaded. And we have some little blades of grass growing up around the base of the rocks. Now I've decided to add some shadows in, some cast shadows. I do this by creating a new layer and dropping its opacity and using a dark color to draw in the shadows. I kind of changed my mind about the light source as we went in this one. Some shadows at the base of the trees, the pine trees over there. And the base of the rocks, clouds. Then I also want to add some highlights coming from our setting sun in the back here. These rays of light are kind of splashing down. Drop the opacity of that layer a little bit and change its color. And we get kind of a sun ray effect. Then we add that sun in the background. Here is the finished landscape based on Gamescape artist's Legacy of the Wizard painting. You can find a link to this painting and more on Gamescape artist's website. The link is in the description. Thank you for watching.